It's time now for our Entre Nous segment. Today we're discussing women's suffrage in France and around the world. Solange Moujane joins me in the studio for more on this. Hello, Solange.
Hi, Annette.
And today marking the anniversary of a very special milestone in France when it comes to women's right to vote.
Yeah, and the timing of this anniversary is pretty great, Annette, because we're working together today, and you are the host and co-founder of France 24's women's program, the 51%. Now, what is this special birthday about? Well, 80 years ago today, on April 29th, 1945, women in France cast ballots for the first time nationwide. So I'm going to take us through what it was like to vote in that World War II election, how France still has a lot of work to do when it comes to women in politics, and finally, how there are still infringements to women's suffrage in places like Afghanistan and Yemen, but also in nations like the United States. But first, this joyous milestone in French history, which actually came quite late when you think about the fact that New Zealand, they enfranchised its female citizens in 1893. It was the first nation to do so, followed shortly afterwards by your home state, I believe, Annette. Nonetheless, if you consider the fact that nearly 20 nations, including Finland in 1906, the UK in 1918, the US the following year, they were just some of the nearly 20 nations that had women voters by 1920. France was pretty late to the party, despite decades of women's movements in France calling for the right to vote. It's World War II that finally sealed the deal for women's suffrage, in part because of role reversals during the war. So it was decided on April 21st, 1944, by Article 17 in an ordinance that women could vote. This decision was signed off by General de Gaulle in Algiers, Algeria, as the war was not over yet. And then the following year, with the municipal elections of April 29th, 1945, the long fight for suffrage for French women became a reality. But at the time, it wasn't just about the women's vote, but also about the actual ability to vote in a free France.
For the first time in 9 years, the French people made their voices heard. These 20 million votes included ballots cast by men and by women. A good nun, a kind mother, and if, like the entire army, the general doesn't vote, here is Madame Charles de Gaulle.
Now, it's needless to say this election was quite out of the ordinary. Many people no longer had official papers, especially women. Soldiers were still deployed in many cases. There was a massive shortage of paper, so there were very few flyers and political brochures. Now, most of the French women who cast their ballots on that day, they have passed away. But a few looked back on the occasion in their old age.
J'existais.
For the first time, I existed. For the first time. Up till then, I was nothing. For the first time, I was asked for my vote, so I existed. It had an impact on me. I still think about it. When we talk about voting, I still see my first ballot.
There were many of us in the room to cast our votes. It was a day that mattered to us. Stupid men were voting, but smart women couldn't. But I thought women were going to obtain things that they hadn't had before, certain rights.
Which ones?
The right to have a checkbook, to have their own money, to be independent.
I still have memories of my French mother telling me about the joy of my French grandmother casting her vote for the very first time. Now, today, 80 years after that election, what is the state of women's suffrage here in France, Solange?
Well, it has become a normal way of life in France, but also worldwide in many nations. So much so that it's easy to forget that women lost their lives in this fight for their fundamental rights. However, the picture isn't all rosy. When it comes to France and women's place in the political sphere and also in other spheres as well, there is still a lot of work to do. When it comes to la parité, or parity, equal number of elected men as women, those numbers are actually getting worse in France. As of last year's legislative elections, only 36% of those elected were women. Same goes for the number of senators. Only around 20% of French mayors are women. So there are still a number of barriers when it comes to representation, but also in regard to respect as well. In 2021, a government did a survey of elected women officials, and it found that 74% said that they had been the victim of sexism or sexual violence during their terms. And of those women, 82% said that they'd been subjected to sexist violence by their male colleagues. On top of that, we also see major issues in regard to le temps de parole, or the amount of time that women politicians are on the airwaves in France. A report last March found that women lawmakers account for just 26% of broadcasted political discourse, and that women were actually losing airtime. So while women's roles and their voices have normalized in the political sphere in France, full gender equality is not there yet, even if certain laws about gender parity have helped a bit.
Yes, it's something that the 51% indeed spends quite a bit of time covering. Solange, let's talk now about other countries. How do women voters and female politicians fare on a larger scale?
Well, according to the Women's Power Index by the Council of Foreign Relations, 25 out of 193 nations have a female head of state or government. Only 9 have cabinets where at least 50% of the members are women, and just 6 of the 193 have legislators where women are just half of the elected officials. So the numbers speak for themselves. Now, in regard to voters, the ability of women to partake in elections alongside men is, for the most part, established and hasn't shifted that much globally. There are, however, a few notable exceptions to this. One, for example, is Afghanistan, where women were actually given the right to vote in 1919, but have since had it removed, then reinstated, and now with the draconian rules of the Taliban, women are not allowed out of their homes to speak in public. They are essentially being erased from society. Yemen, too, is seeing a shift of pulling back of women's freedom of movement and their rights. There are also, of course, many nations where men and women aren't able to cast ballots or cast ballots for just one party, like North Korea, or where the elections are far from free and fair. But one nation that may come as a surprise about this is the United States. In the U.S. right now, there is a bill that has passed the House called the SAVE Act. And similar legislation has already passed in 3 states and is being proposed in 24 others. And it could potentially disenfranchise millions of Americans, and especially women. The bill would require strict proofs of citizenship to vote. And that becomes tricky considering the fact that more than half of Americans do not have passports. And 69 million American women, or 83% of married women, they have taken on their husbands' names, which means that their birth certificates don't match. And that means that when they go to the polls, they could potentially be denied this very fundamental right. So, be it in the U.S., in France, across the world, the right to vote remains a very precious but also a very fragile thing for both men and women.
Indeed. Thank you so much for that, Solange Moujan.